Hello everyone and welcome to yet another episode of Anyone Can Click, where we break down photography to its absolute basics 1 week at a time. In the last video, we covered the 4 questions that we can ask ourselves in order to help us compose better photographs. In today's episode, I will take you through 4 points to keep in mind while doing so. And at the end of the video, I will also be uncomposing one of my photographs so I can take you through the entire process of how I composed that particular photograph. On that note, without further ado, let's begin. So point number 1, clipping off of body parts. Now this is a mistake that we are all guilty of, and case in point, if you go back to your gallery and check your photographs, I'm sure you will find several occasions where we have rendered our near and dear ones without fingertips, toe tips, and in some very unfortunate cases, even the skull cap. In the wild too, this mistake happens. And for me, the most common casualties were tips of ears, tails, and limbs. Let me show you one of my photographs. This is a photograph of a paradise flycatcher, and I love the effect of the foreground blur that the leaves have rendered. But that last 0.5 centimeter of tail that I clipped off meant that this would always be an incomplete and almost perfect shot for me. Now this is a mistake that is very easily made, but it's even easier to avoid. All you have to do is 1. Scan the 4 sides of your viewfinder once before you click that shutter button, and the second thing to do is just ensure that you're leaving a healthy amount of breathing space around your subject so that even a slight movement of the hand does not result in an accident like that. A bonus tip for you here is that this clipping off of body parts applies as much to reflections as it does to the main subject. Now take a look at this photograph. So if you have a water body or a mirror and there is a reflection involved, ensure that you're incorporating the entirety of the reflection in the photograph as well. Sometimes you may want only a part of the subject for creative purposes, and that is completely okay. Accidental clips are the ones to be avoided. Which brings me to point number 2. Always check the background. Now we have already learned that the camera and our eyes can focus in planes, and most often we stick to the plane where our subject is, completely ignoring the background in the process, which may result in some unwanted artifacts of this nature. Now, while I'm grateful to the photographer for those extra set of ears, I would much rather have a photograph without that. And here is another example for you. Again, a mistake which can easily be avoided by just sparing an extra second to scan the background to ensure that there are no strange artifacts that are jutting out of the subject, be it a tree, a building, or any other thing. Now, both points 1 and 2 will take all of an extra couple of seconds of your time, but they will avoid a whole lot of unnecessary, unwanted distractions in the photograph. Now coming to point number 3, and that is vantage point. Where do you shoot from? Now I'm sure you've heard that always try to get that eye level shot, and that is absolutely correct, because when you take eye level shots, it creates some very immersive portraits which in turn create impactful photographs. But is that the only vantage point to use? The answer is no. Take a look at this example that I've shared in my last video. Now this photograph was not taken at eye level. Instead, I was standing on top of the seat of the vehicle to take the shot, and that gave me 2 things. The first is that I could capture the vibrant colors of the ground in the midday sun, against which my zebras looked phenomenal. And the second point, for which you'll have to look a little more closely, is the mirage in the background, which tells a whole different story of the arid world of these zebras, both of which would have been missed had I taken the shot at eye level. I have one other example to demonstrate this point. This photograph was once again taken from a vantage point of above eye level, and this serves 3 purposes. The first one is that I could avoid that unnecessary distraction of the mud wall of the water hole. The second point is I could highlight the colors and textures of the water, and point number 3 is I could draw attention to the frogs which started leaping out when the tiger started settling in. So every vantage point comes with its merits, so explore all the 3 vantage points and see what tells your story the best. This brings me to point number 4, which is also the first point of the last video, and that is focal length. Now, different focal lengths come with their own stereotypes. You're supposed to photograph landscapes with wide-angle lenses or birds and portraits with telephoto lenses. There are reasons for those stereotypes, predominantly to do with the depth of field and the field of view. But that does not mean that you cannot break them. And sometimes when you do, when you start shooting landscapes with telephoto lenses, or when you shoot birds with a wide-angle lens, the story that you can actually tell is going to be vastly different. The perspective is going to be fresh, which is why do not box yourself into these stereotypes. Look beyond it, and sometimes you may actually create some very never seen before frames. Now, there are two reasons why I'm sharing this point with you. Several times when we think we don't have the right lens, we don't even attempt to click a photograph. So do not do that. You can take any photograph and tell a different story with any lens that you have. And the second point, and this becomes relevant when we are photographing with a zoom lens, is that when a subject starts coming closer, we instinctively start zooming out. And by doing this, we are not only telling the same story again and again, but we are also missing out on telling a different story, giving a different perspective. Now, these are 4 practical tips to keep in mind when we are composing our shot. With that, we have reached the last part of the video, and as promised, I'm going to uncompose one of my photographs and take you through the entire process of using the 4 questions of composition to show you how I've arrived at the final photograph. To get this going, let's begin with this scene of a magnificent elephant against the quintessential Masai Mara backdrop. And I start with question 1. What is my story? Now, my story was not going to be about the elephant alone. When I looked up from my viewfinder, I knew, looking at the scene and the colors, that I wanted to tell the story of the elephant and its home. I definitely wanted a wider shot. So I zoomed out a little and moved to question 2. How do I balance my shot? Now, I use 2 techniques here. First, the rule of thirds to place my horizon with the lower grid line. I chose this because I loved the drama of the sky and I wanted to give it more real estate in the photograph. And second, I saw the opportunity to use the steel yard technique, so I incorporated the tree in the far right to balance the image. Now, this was nice, but I wanted to see if I could make it better, which is when I moved to questions 3 and 4. I zoomed out a little more to see how I could use them. Now, I introduced 2 more trees, which not only created a subtle leading line towards the horizon, but more importantly, they became very effective depth definers, introducing a 3-dimensionality in the photograph. But they added layers not only to the photograph, they added layers to my story too. You see, Mara in Masai Mara means spotted, and it is scattered trees and shrubs of the landscape that give it this appearance, like how it is in the picture. The curious placement of the elephant where otherwise a 4th tree would stand was the clincher for me. The picture and my story was now complete. And like I said, once you have a story in mind, the elements of the scene will all act as enablers to tell that story. These guidelines will eventually become a natural part of the process without you having to memorize this theory or that theory. They will start becoming part of your reflexes. And interestingly, it is another photograph from this very evening that forms the centerpiece of my living room. And I cannot describe the joy I feel every single time that I look at it. And I'm instantly transported to that evening. With that, we have reached the end of today's video on practical tips to composition. In the next episode, we will cover part 3 and the final segment of composition guidelines, where we will cover the role of light in composition. And yes, if you have found this video useful, please do like, subscribe and comment. It greatly helps the channel. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.